then what it means is that we should not be looking somewhere else. We should not be looking somewhere else. And this is not even only me who's saying this, but we have heard people like President Museveni on numerous times saying this. Of course, for him, he has a narrow outlook. He always talks about Uganda, that Uganda doesn't need aid and stuff like that. We have seen this. So when you look at our economy as Africa, the economy is around $3.5 trillion. Our economy is equivalent to that of India. All right. But India has all kind of manner of things, all kind of things, all manner of things that it is doing, all kind of innovations. It has a space program. India has gone to space. Yet we have the same size of economy. But even to go further than that, the African economy, when you come to the resources, we have much more resources than India. We have 12 times more resources than India. Our land is 12 times that of India, yet we have the same population. So if anything, the African continent is underpopulated. So number one is to understand that we have the resources. So if you know that you have the resources and someone has been hoodwinking you that you don't have the resources, then you know that that yes, I don't need aid. But if you fail to know this, then you're going to continue to go around begging for what you have while the people are taking from you. And this is the situation that we are seeing, all over the African continent, going out there to beg. Yet we have the capacity to do these things for ourselves, whether it is putting up a space program, whether it is having, our own automobile industry. Our automobile industry is almost non-existent. We don't have an automobile industry. That we don't manufacture our own vehicles, we don't manufacture our own planes. India is manufacturing planes, is manufacturing automobile. Even one of their companies, which is called Tata, went and bought out Range Rover, Land Rover, which manufactures Range Rover and Defender and all these vehicles, Jaguar, they bought it, which was a British company. But how were they able to do it? Yet we have the same economy. So once we understand the fact that we have the resources, we have more resources, we have the same economy like India, we have the GDP the same as that of India, we have almost the same population. When you look at our literacy rate is more than 70 currently. The African continent literacy rate is 70. So the continent is really ready to take off. What is holding back the continent is imperialism at the top. Number two is the people who are helping imperialism to exploit it, who are most of them black faces. So these are the problems basically that we have to deal with so that we can transform the continent rapidly and catch up with the rest of the world. India is manufacturing its own, fighter jets. Is manufacturing its own trains. Is manufacturing its own vehicles. Semiconductors, they are manufacturing the semiconductors. And yet the era in which we have emerged as Africans in this era, we have to compete globally. You have no option. The small states cannot compete. Where we are right now is you have to be competing globally. Countries like Germany and all the other European countries like France, they have this technology and they have the resources, but they cannot compete now with China. Why? Because globally, you have to produce at scale. You can't compete if you are not producing at scale now. So Germany now is struggling. Even though it has everything, it has the capital, it has all the monies, it has, the skills, the educated people, it has, the technology. But China now is out competing it because China can produce now at scale. So I think that as Africans, we have to look at it from that point. So the resources are there, but how to use them. So the obstacle to the use of those resources to advance Africa rapidly and self-independence is not that we don't have the resources. They are lying. The people who are saying that we don't have the resources, they are lying. The resources, we have them. And an example is President Magufuli. President Magufuli, when he came to power, he never went anywhere to borrow money. He used Tanzania's money, but there's no president almost in Tanzania who achieved as much as President Magufuli, even all across the African continent. Even Ramaphosa himself, all the period he has been there, you can't compare him to the 5 years Magufuli was in Tanzania. Or even President Museveni, the 30 years he has been in power, 40 years. You can't compare him to Magufuli. And yet Magufuli achieved whatever he achieved in less than 5 years. He built a 2,000 megawatt dam in Tanzania in 5 years. The installed capacity of countries like Uganda of electricity is around 1,300 megawatts. All right. And this has been over 40 years, because when President Museveni came to power, there was about 300 megawatts of installed capacity, and then he added on that. This is 40 years. Magufuli, when he came, he built a 2,000 megawatt dam. Not on borrowed money, on Tanzania's money. But where was that money, basically? Where did he get it from? He put back Tanzania's, Tanzania Air, the airlines. He bought 7 aircraft, brand new, without borrowing it. They were not borrowed. They were paid with Tanzania's money. So you ask, where did he get the money from? He bought trains. The new trains which Tanzania is implementing right now, which they are riding on. He built roads. The new trains, they were paid for by President Magufuli. They were paid for during President Magufuli. Where did he get the money? What he did, basically, is to block the imperialist exploitation of Tanzania. That is what he did. Because when you look at the data from the Africa Development Bank, and of course you look at the illicit financial outflow, even that the one we have been talking about, but there's recent data which came out from the Africa Development Bank group on Africa's economic outlook for 2024 and 2025. Africa is losing. There's a leakage on the African continent, actually, of around $600 billion. This is how much is getting out of the continent. $600 billion. That's the leakage. So these combined is far outstrips whatever they are talking about, that is foreign direct investments, all these things. So these people are stealing from the continent. $600 billion annually, including the so-called illicit financial outflow, which the United Nations said, which is around $90 billion. So President Magufuli, this is what he did, is that he blocked the outflow of that money from Tanzania. And it was there existent that these companies, which are British and Canadian, are mining gold over there in Tanzania. They would take the gold and put it in containers in sand and take it out as sand instead of gold. They are stealing, basically stealing. So he blocked these activities at the port and even made them pay back, the back taxes which they were evading. So, and Tanzania came to take shares in the gold mines. This is how he raised the money to finance all these projects. So it tells you that what we are lacking is not resources. We are lacking, there's courage that is lacking to face imperialism head on and defeat it on the continent, so that the resources can return back to the African people. And there's collaborators who are collaborating with that imperialism. During his stay in power, President Magufuli, you heard that he was throwing out people from ports and, Tanzania Revenue Authority. These were corrupt people because they were collaborating with the imperialists in stealing from the country. And of course, internationally, they started attacking him. They said that he was imperialist and stuff like that. I mean, they said that he was a dictator, and they started attacking him. Why? Because the imperialist interests are integrated. They are basically integrated, whether you're talking about the media. Nkrumah has already indicated this. When you talk about, neocolonialism, his work, most important work, one of his most important works, neocolonialism, the last stage of imperialism. Nkrumah has already shown this, how they are integrated. That book, I think that if anyone doesn't read that book, it doesn't want to read the whole book, at least they can read one chapter which summarizes almost all the whole book, which is called The Mechanisms of Neocolonialism. Nkrumah points out Hollywood, points out the media in the West, he points out the United States military, he points out the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, he points out the religions themselves, how they are integrated. The whole system, he exposed it. So people like Magufuli now, they are attacked by Bloomberg and all these Western platforms, but they are working together with these companies, and Magufuli knew that he's going to die. These guys are going to attack him. They are coming after him. And he used to mention these things, that he has sacrificed. He said that I've sacrificed my life because I want the Tanzania people, to be well. He knew what was coming. Magufuli knew what was coming. So he said all these things simply because he touched the imperialist side. He touched the imperialist side. Now, the exploitation, I did recently a video where I pointed out that this claim that there is a resource curse in Africa, because Financial Times recently published a video in which they claim that how is Nigeria now fighting to deal with the resource curse, the oil curse. How can you? So this claim actually in itself is racist. This is a racist claim, because in this you claim that the Africans cannot manage their resources. So whenever they have the resources, then it is a resource curse. Not knowing that these imperialists are taking the resources. They are stealing these resources. And when you want to take them back, they call you a dictator. But then when you leave them to steal the resources, they say it is a resource curse. What actually is the reality is that this is an imperialistic curse, a neo-colonial curse that we are facing. This is a curse by imperialism, neo-colonial curse. This is what we have to fight against, that we have to first to fight against the imperialist, neo-colonialistic curse. And we've seen that the Western world has been fighting against the Dangote oil refinery simply because Africans are trying to refine their own products now. They don't need the West. They're trying to retain all. $30 billion every year that Nigeria is spending on importation of oil products. And what are they doing? We have seen Bloomberg, Reuters, we have seen, Western NGOs attacking the Dangote oil refinery, you see? And of course, they are failing in all these aspects. We saw that one of the prominent Nigerian journalists, David Hundein, came out to expose a Western NGO which was telling him to write a piece for them. So they use these puppets, these black faces, and of course we see the attack also on African Stream, which I've just seen right now. So once we don't understand this tactic, that they are attacking, they don't want any narrative, outlaw any narrative on the African continent and plant your own, say it is a resource curse. What is really imperialism? They want to call it a resource curse, which is completely racist to claim, to justify, and it is an attempt to justify the exploitation of the African continent and its resources, and to deny Africans access to good hospitals, good roads, and whatever it is, good health and good feeding, the most advanced life that can be achieved in the world, to deny that to Africans. We know that in Nigeria, the people who are dominating the oil industry, which they are calling an oil curse, is Chevron, which is a United States company. We have ExxonMobil, which is a United States company. Shell, Royal Dutch Shell, which is a Dutch company which is based in Britain. All right, BP, British Petroleum, Total Energy, which is French. So how can you now say it's a oil curse, it's an oil curse, it's a resource curse, when you people are the ones who are stealing? How is it a resource curse? So you can see that once we understand where the resources are, there's no need even for us to go out there and beg. There's no really need. The project which we are trying to work on, which we are trying to push forward, even today I was doing a presentation at the Development Bank of Ghana, just today, this morning, for about an hour, is that you have this money, and actually the Africa Import and Export Bank is realizing this, recently, that we have this money that is coming in as remittances, even before you talk about the $3.5 trillion which we have on the continent. You have this money that is flowing into the continent, about $100 billion. This money can be used for investment a lot. And of course, it doesn't mean that you should take it away from the people, the African diaspora who are sending it onto the continent. But if you look at it creatively, this money can be used to invest in the African continent and develop it rapidly. Because basically, the West, how much money are they sending to the continent? Foreign direct investment is less than $40 billion, I think $43 billion. All right, is less than $45 billion. That is the foreign direct investment. So it shows you that Africans are investing in the African continent more than these so-called, foreign countries. The aid, whatever is aid or whatever they are talking about that is aid, is less than $40 billion. So the money they are stealing from Africa, according to the Africa Development Bank, which is about $600 billion, which is almost like 30% of the African economy. It is $600 billion, 15 to 30% somewhere there, is flowing out of the continent, while they bring in pennies and they take everything that belongs to the continent. So this is where the resources are. So I believe that we can build a railway platform starting with, because if you are talking about developing the continent, you cannot develop it, and you're talking about the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, which the Secretary General Wamkelemen is pushing forward in all these countries. You can't talk about trade. What are you going? How are you going to move these goods? You can't move them through air. We don't even have the aircraft. We don't have enough aircraft because we don't manufacture our own aircraft, which we need to do going forward. We don't have the roads which are linking the continent. So then, how can a small business person in Kenya or in Zimbabwe or in Zambia transport their goods all the way from Zambia to Algeria? It's going to cost them. The people will not be able to afford those goods by the time they arrive to Algeria from Tanzania. It's going to be too expensive that it is cheaper to import those goods from Europe into Algeria than importing them from Tanzania, or importing the milk. I saw a video recently where President Obasanjo was in Uganda, and he was looking at the production of milk and coffee, and he was wondering, why is Nigeria importing all these products when these products are present in Uganda and are present in East Africa: coffee, tea, and milk, powder milk, which is normally converted from cow milk. So he was like, what the hell? He didn't know that. And this is somebody who has access to almost all the whole continent, and he has been a president of Nigeria in the past. So you see that Nigeria is importing all these things, but they are present in East Africa. Now, how are you going to move those goods cheaply and send them to Nigeria and compete with the European farmers who are being subsidized by Europe and the American farmers who are being subsidized by the United States? How are you going to compete? If you cannot compete even with their chicken within your own country, within the West African region, the United States has dumped chicken from the United States. Its farmers are dumping chicken all over the West African region, and I believe even in the South African region. And our farmers cannot even compete with this because these farmers from the United States are subsidized. Their chicken is subsidized. And all these puppets we have, like Akufo-Addo and all the others, Tinubu, they just leave things to flow in. And of course, they cave into the pressure and the fact that they don't have integrity in themselves and stuff like that. So how are you going to compete with that? You need now a railway platform across the African continent to transport these goods if you are talking about the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. And you can finance it. You don't need these people to come in and give you any money. And so this is what basically we are trying to show. These people, whether it is, we spoke to McDan, who has the biggest shipping line, who, Africa owned this shipping line in Africa. We are speaking to different people to try to convince them to give us funding, which we need for us to get off the ground so that we can mobilize all these stakeholders that are supposed to work on this project. Because there's particular stakeholders who are supposed to work on the project itself. And we are just initiating the idea, and we need to mobilize them. But you cannot mobilize them if you don't have, resources. If you don't have, a given amount of resources, and you are not operating in an official, office, or if you are distracted, you are running here and here. Because the project we are working on is around $150 billion. So this is a huge, huge project, and which was going to unlock more than $1 trillion for the continent. When you talk about the transportation of goods all across the continent, and then you talk about also tourism, it could look more than $1 trillion in itself. So with just an investment of 10%, you could unlock $1 trillion, 10%, which is, close to 10-15%, which is $150 billion. You unlock $1 trillion, $1,000 billion. So more than that, actually. For me, that is my view on the issue of self-sufficiency in, when it comes to transport, but also even in other technologies, because we're going to be attractive as a continent if we do certain things by ourselves. That's how China was. Because by the time in the 80s, the Americans and the West started going to China, China had already prepared itself. It had already laid the groundwork. It had educated people. It had scientists, right? It had these people were educated. It has a steel industry already. It had transportation, good transportation network. It had energy, electricity was there. But look at the African continent. Even South Africa, the most advanced economy on the African continent, is facing energy problems. Here we don't have transportation for the whole continent. But if we solve this problem, if we put up a steel industry, and this railway platform which we are suggesting is going to come with the steel industry and the train manufacturing, industry for Africa, because these people who want to work on it, they will be foreigners. It will be either Alstom from France. It will either be or it will be the CRRC from China. Anyone who wants to work on it, we have conditions, because the money is ours. We have our own money. We have conditions that they have to establish on the continent. The trains have to be manufactured on the continent using our steel, our own steel. And so the steel industry is the one we want to establish first, because we want to use our own steel even to lay the train tracks, the railway lines. We want to use the steel which is coming from the continent. So you can see that there's huge potential. Just the rail itself is huge potential that is going to unlock. Africa is importing about 62% of its steel currently. So you substitute all that money that is flowing out, of the continent. Remember that recently Dangote wanted to establish a steel industry, but because of the behavior of the Tinubu administration, which has been sabotaged in the oil refinery, he dumped those plans and said he will not invest even in steel, in the refining of steel, refining the iron ore and converting it to steel, because he was very angry. The Dangote industry was very angry because of how they are treating him, when it comes to the refinery. And they are working, of course, they are working under the pressure of the imperialists to sabotage the refinery and deny it access to crude oil. Yeah, so the self-sufficiency is very possible, but of course we have to understand what the problem is and work, consciously, knowing that these are the obstacles. The main obstacles is not really corruption. Even the United States, corruption is prevalent. The Nancy Pelosi's and members of Congress, all of them are doing insider trading, which they are not supposed to. These corporations are bribing them. All these guys, the senators. This is all corruption, but is legalized. The corruption is high tech. I think is Yanis Varoufakis, who's the recent previous Greece minister. He said that Europe. He was comparing northern Europe with the southern part of Europe, because even in Europe they have their special segregation within there, that they segregate the southern Europeans from the northern Europeans, like people who are in Greece, they are in south. So they say that Greece is very corrupt, and all these countries in Portugal and stuff like that, they are more corrupt Europeans. So he said that in the north, in Germany and all these countries of Europe which are in the north, they have high-tech corruption. Their corruption is high-tech, you see, to the point that they can fake a vehicle that you come and test it and it meets emissions, the standard emissions which are required by, for example, the government. And they were talking about Volkswagen, of course. But when you remove the machine which tests for these emissions, the vehicle starts emitting, dirty, carbon monoxide. But when you put the machine, the vehicle will sense that you have put the machine and it will emit. And of course, Volkswagen was fined more than $3 billion for this scandal. They call it scandal. Their corruption, normally they call it scandal, and they call it lobbying. So he said that they have high-tech corruption. So even when you look at Africa itself, there is even more high-tech corruption in the West, which you cannot even compare to the African continent, but they have managed to grow. You see, corruption is everywhere. So this is not the problem, and it is not resource scarce. And it is unfortunate that even this narrative, which is being pumped out by the West, has been bought in by the African intellectuals. And this is where the problem is, that as the African Continental Unity Party, we have so much work to do. We have huge amounts of work. Aside fighting imperialism itself, we have to fight the collaborators of imperialism, and now we have to fight against the people who have been socialized by imperialism to believe that what imperialism is saying. And this is a huge problem. It's a huge problem. So the resources, we have them if you look carefully, and we just need to live within our means. The new type of leadership that is supposed to emerge within our generation has to live within the means of our people. It has to live within the means of society. If it doesn't want to live within the means of society, then that is the leadership that you see that Marcus Garvey said, that the leadership which will sell you out Okay, we will enslave you. This is the leadership which will enslave you. And that's the leadership that we currently have on the African continent, even in the diaspora. You see that the African leadership in the United States, or the African American leadership, is completely out of touch with the reality, with the realities of the African American people on the ground. So these people, they don't want to live within the means of their people. So at the end of the day, what do? They have to sell out. They have to go and borrow to sustain that life. So if you cut this off, then you are in a good position to survive, because even these loans that are being given, they are just exploitative loans. I remember President Museveni speaking at one of the summits which was organized by the World Bank, said that the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, in broad daylight at a World Bank summit which was organized by President Ruto, that the World Bank and IMF has been engaged in profiteering of these loans. Africa with 9 loans which are 2 times the interest rate. So you ask a question, are you now trying to help these countries, or you are trying to exploit them? And the answer is clear, because the West pays less interest rate, and these people, they have money. Why would someone who has the money pay lower interest rate, and the one who doesn't have it and needs it the most pays higher interest rates? So this is exploitation. So, and Nkrumah, of course, pointed this out. But of course, from time to time, we need even present-day heads of state to speak about it. But we know it, that Nkrumah pointed out even this in neocolonialism, the last stage of imperialism. So when you block off these loans which are exploitative, we have to live within our means. We have to live in our own means, like what Magufuli did, like what Traore they are doing over there in Burkina Faso, like what Thomas Sankara did. To live within our means and use our own resources, we will be able to develop, without a doubt. And the leaders have to live within our means. These huge salaries and extravagant life, these European extravagant lives which are being copied, when we have not yet attained those standards of life, I think have to be abandoned, and hence we will be able to free up resources to invest in whether education, whether health, whether industrialization, which industrialization we need to lay a ground. We need to lay very solid ground for industrialization, because that has not been laid. We need a transportation system across the continent. We need a communication system across the continent. All these have not been laid. These foundations have not been laid. We need energy. The systems like the Inga Dam in Democratic Republic of Congo has to be built. Nuclear power plants all across the African continent have to be built in the north, south, at least 4 of them, to cover the north, the south, and the east, to provide energy to almost 90% of Africans who don't have electricity currently. So if we lay this foundation and we take care of transport, energy, and communication, and we put them in the hands of Africans at a cheap price, then the foundation for industrialization itself will have been laid. And even the people who want to invest in Africa will be attracted to the African continent, because you have now opened up the market. You have this market of 1.4 billion people right now, but the market is not integrated really. You are talking about the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, but this is a pipe dream, because the people are not yet connected. You have to connect them with the transportation system and the communication system. Then the outside world, you will see that, damn, this is a market. This is a real market now. But what we have now is not a real market. It's not a real market. So this will open up the continent, and then the self-sufficiency, of course, I believe that will be attained. But all these, we need to build them by ourselves without the help of anyone. You've never heard that the West went to China and built for them the railway lines. You never heard that the West went to China and built for them their dams and energy, facilities, which are powering their industry, and the West owns them, runs them. Never. You never heard that the West goes to China and built the communication system for them and lay fiber optic cable for them. Because they don't even want it. They don't want the West to control their communication. They don't want the West to control their energy. They don't want the West to control their transportation system. Because these are the cores of industrialization. The West cannot control their resources in China, cannot control the Chinese resources. You will never hear they are over there mining oil, drilling for oil. The Chinese, they drill their own oil. So why do we in Africa have an inappropriate behavior that we want the West to come and some sort of invest in our roads, invest in our railway, invest in our telecommunication? I hear, President Ramaphosa, in New York is talking to Elon Musk. I don't know, Elon Musk should come and do what and invest in what? Invest in the community. So this behavior, I think that is completely is an inappropriate behavior. I think it's Dr. Claude Anderson from the United States, or African Americans, who say that is an inappropriate behavior. What basically means is that Africans who, or blacks who rile up against their own interests or the interests of their people and they sell them out. He calls it inappropriate behavior. So for me, I believe that we have the resources and we have the capacity, we have the capability, and there's nothing we are missing currently. What we are missing now is the removal, the courage to remove the current system and defeat it completely defeat it, and then the reconstruction of the continent will move ahead and rapidly within our own generation. So sorry for talking too much, but thank you so much.